May 1963, in the historic city of Addis Ababa, our founding mothers and fathers set two main objectives: the market integration of the African continent, pushing back and fighting colonialists and freedom on the continent. One vision was achieved, the other continued to evade our continent for decades. Yeah. So what we are doing in Ghana, in Accra, which, by the way, is also a very important symbol, because Ghana, as we all know, has been always on the vanguard of integration and unity of the continent. And so the establishment of a market, an integrated market in Africa, is a long-held vision, which unfortunately evaded us, but we are now on track to make it a reality.
Okay. When you refer to May 1963, I then cast our eyes forward to Agenda 2063 and the hopes for Africa. And it appears to me that the aspirations of an Agenda 2063 are embodied in the work of an African continental free trade area. The regional integration aspect, the industrialization aspect, the economic transformation aspect. And all of those hopes have to somehow come into fruition through this common market, free movement of goods and services and labor. And so, with all of these expectations, where do you begin? You know, in Africa, there's a proverb that says, if you want to take down an elephant, you've got to go at it one bite at a time. So, where do you choose to focus your energies?
Well, the starting point was to build a legal construct for the rules that will underpin the market integration that we are seeking to achieve. And I must say there's nothing novel about that. We've seen it in the European Union. Yeah. With the conclusion of the last two protocols, Protocol on Women and Youth in Trade, the Protocol on Digital Trade that the heads of states adopted in February this year, I would say that we are on track in terms of the building the legal foundation, the legal construct, the rules that actually position the continent to be a common market. The second important aspect is the political will and commitment. There are 47 members of the African Union who have ratified the agreement establishing the AfCFTA, which means that 47 governments have accepted the obligation to eliminate barriers to intra-Africa trade, to eliminate barriers to intra-Africa investment, which, as we know, is less than 4%, and in future to ensure that we have free movement of persons. These require political will. And the fact that in less than 5 years we have been able to reach consensus on long-standing macroeconomic policy complexities, industrial development policy complexities, and we've been able to reach consensus in these different areas in less than 5 years, to me, speaks volumes about the political will of our heads of states.
But there's a corollary to that, in that there's 8 heads of state, 8 parliaments that have not ratified the agreement. What are the stumbling blocks there?
Well, I'm not worried that there are a number of countries that have not yet ratified. And the reason I'm not worried is because each country is different. You have to consult extensively the private sector, civil society. The country must move in unison towards a particular objective. And so the countries that you have mentioned that have not ratified, I do know for a fact that they are not politically opposed to the objective, but they are either legal requirements that they have to follow, constitutional requirements for entering into a legally binding treaty, or because the private sector says, well, we want to be convinced that we are not going to be swamped by goods from this country or that country, that there are the appropriate safeguards in place to protect and enhance the domestic market. So these are things that we are working through, and I am confident that the countries you've mentioned will ratify.
Okay, and so what you're describing to us is that the process itself of establishing a continental free trade agreement is a legal process, it's a democratic process, and it needs the buy-in of all members of society in any given country. Let's talk about the actual building blocks as you craft and design a common market for Africa. The rules of origin has been the one issue that my understanding you've spent a lot of time working through, the harmonization of standards and the rules of origin. Why is that?
It's important for a number of reasons. First, we need to have common local content rules or rules of origin to foster industrial development in Africa. Second, to foster investment in Africa. I had a conversation with a CEO of a global auto manufacturer. And he said to me, we are in East Africa. If we want to expand our operations to West Africa or Central Africa or any other region of the continent, we are subject to different rules for assembly and production of a vehicle. And that is a barrier to investment. Yeah. It's a barrier to Africa's accelerated industrial development. It's a barrier to job creation. So what we are discussing now, ministers of trade, a single set of rules for local content for the whole continent. And by the way, the continent of Africa trades close to 5,000 products. Right. Before the AfCFTA, each region or each country, depending on whether you are in a customs union or not, each region or each country had its own rules of origin. So if you are an exporter or an investor or a small medium enterprise, right, the cost of subjecting yourself to each market that you want to do business in it can be prohibitive. Right. So we have now consensus on 92.3 products that we trade in Africa. We have rules of origin, common set of rules of origin for all of those products. What we are yet to conclude, which we will by the end of the year, textiles and clothing, and the automotive sector. Right. And the reason is because these are the two sectors that are complex from an industrial development point of view, and countries on the continent are at different levels of industrial capacity in those two sectors. So we've got to be very deliberate how we craft the rules of origin in these areas.
Okay, I think in previous conversations we've spoken about this particular aspect. So can we just talk tangibly how things work on the ground? I remember filming in Senegal with one of the largest manufacturer of food processing, an agro-food processor. And what he said was, when his trucks leave Dakar and enter the ECOWAS region, there's one tax regimen. Mm-hmm. Once those trucks move beyond ECOWAS, cross through Cameroon into Central Africa, there's a different customs and tax regimen which shoots up by 60% in terms of the costs. Once those trucks have moved beyond DRC entering East Africa, there's another set of rules. And so the big frustration was, if a vehicle is going to leave one side of the African continent to get to the other side to move goods and services, you're going to receive many receipts, you're going to pay different customs and excise taxes, and then of course the infrastructure withstanding. You don't even know if the truck is going to make it all the way through. So you've got an infrastructure issue, you've got a harmonization and standards issue, you've got a cost and customs and benefits issue. So how are you streamlining all of those processes?
There are three very distinct but related areas that have been a barrier to that exporter in Senegal being able to seamlessly transit through the Abidjan-Lagos corridor onto the next corridor. Trade facilitation, customs systems harmonization, and transit rules. We have consensus on all of them now through the AfCFTA, but of course the reality on the ground continues to be different. The cost of transit through the borders and through the different regions of the continent continues to be high.
Yeah.
We also have costs that are related to insurance of goods that as they transit in each jurisdiction and as they transit through each customs union. That is one of the priorities for us and AfCFTA. To give you an example of how we intend to tackle this, if you are transiting your goods from Southern Africa to Eastern Africa, you may very well be subject to 4, 5, or even 6 different insurance requirements for your goods to transit.
Right.
We are now in the process of creating what we call a single transit guarantee scheme, which will be underwritten by AfCFTA up to $700-800 million to enable the exporter, the truck, to have only one single transit guarantee scheme that will smoothly and efficiently enable them to move their goods across the various parts of the continent.
Let's focus on the economic transformation aspect of Agenda 2063 and the African Continental Free Trade Area and how the two dovetail. So the World Bank says if done right, if this common market is built properly with the blueprints that you've described, it can lift 30 million people out of abject poverty, and it can improve the incomes of 68 million others. So there's a multiplier effect. Could you describe for us how you create a multiplier effect through a free trade area?
And it can also, and it is actually projected to contribute to Africa's combined GDP by $450 billion by the year 2035 if we do it right, and when we are in full implementation mode. What we're focusing on is two things: the rules that enable the trade agreement to be commercially meaningful, so that our traders can take advantage of this market, which we say correctly that it is a market of 1.4 billion people with a combined GDP today of 3.4 trillion United States dollars, which by the year 2035 is said to be $16.3 trillion, enabling small medium enterprises, which all of us know contribute over 60% to Africa's GDP, create over 450 million jobs. Where we have inclusion of small medium enterprises, of enterprises that are led by women and young people, the multiplier effect, in my view, will be visible and tangible. Creating commercially meaningful opportunities for these very important drivers of Africa's economy is what will enable us to see the benefits. Of course, at the same time, as we are addressing inclusion, which is an important imperative, we are creating commercially meaningful opportunities. That's the first point I would suggest. The second is to introduce tools. We are not the European Union or any other advanced region. We have to move beyond. We have to take more affirmative action after we've negotiated the agreement. That is why we have now, with the African Union, AfCFTA, the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, to enable payment in local currency so that Africans, SMEs, will reduce the cost of trade.
Right.
Second, I just mentioned the Transit Guarantee Scheme. We're working on trade finance to reduce the cost of trade, the cost of money, to enable trade. We have the AfCFTA Adjustment Fund, which will support implementation of the agreement. These are the tools that are very, very concrete, that are essential to enable commercial meaningfulness of this huge market that all of us know has all of the factors and the endowments that we need for us to be successful.
Now let's talk about impediments, unfortunately. I've alluded to the fact that infrastructure is an impediment, just road infrastructure, rail infrastructure, and 90% of goods, unfortunately, still move by road through the African continent. So there's definitely a case to be made for investing in rail, fixing cargo airports, quality of the ports as well. The red tape remains a huge issue as we talk about customs and excise duties and the synchronization of these rules across borders. It's been said that if you just simplified these issues, you would drive 292 billion up to 450 billion in additional income gains simply by getting rid of the blockages in the systems. So when you're having conversations with African heads of state who can do these things, whether it's on the basis of their customs rules or dealing with issues around homeland security or just how their borders are manned, border management, what did they say? Because a lot of governments were told actually make their money from these duties.
Well, the point I make is when you reduce and eliminate duties, actually, you can generate more revenue from value-added tax. The amount of goods that cross the border, even if those goods cross the border at zero duty, from a domestic taxation point of view, there's potential to continue to generate funds. On infrastructure, absolutely. I think the deficit is estimated now to be at annually $150 billion infrastructure deficit, which also is an opportunity to invest, to improve the infrastructure that supports trade. So African Development Bank, Africa Finance Corporation, Afrexim Bank, all of our development finance institutions have substantial investments that they have made in infrastructure development to support trade. And if you look at some of the most successful regions on the continent, there has been a combination of elimination of the inefficiencies for transit of goods combined with investment in infrastructure.
Right.
And I will give you an example. Port of Mombasa in Kenya, 15 years ago, it took to travel a distance of 1,600 kilometers from Mombasa to Kampala. 15 days, 28 steps, 15 years ago. Today, due to investments in not only hard infrastructure, but soft infrastructure, digital harmonization of custom systems, the same distance, Mombasa to Kampala, 3 days, 1 step.
Right.
So we know that it's possible because there are regions in the continent that have succeeded to deploy a trade agreement for efficiency of the market and for efficiency of infrastructure investment.
When you talk about efficiency, you've also referred to payment systems, and and you referred to Kenya, which pioneered money transfer, of course, through M-Pesa. But since then, we've seen a lot of evolution in this space. Just this week, I was trying to buy a dress in Nigeria, and I was introduced to World Remit, which connects a bank in Nigeria to a bank in South Africa. And somewhere in the ether, the money sits whilst they're verifying everybody's bona fides. So I think that is credit to some of the work that is already being done by Afrexim Bank and yourselves. But could you tell us about the opportunities for innovation, and particularly for working with the private sector? Because I think this is where they can leverage their systems, the telcos, and also the banks coming into the system. What are you doing with them?
There is a great deal of interest from the private sector to invest in trade for commercially priced returns for them, which is correct. But at the same time, of course, there's a convergence of objectives in terms of us wanting to have a common market. On payments, just last month, we were in a roundtable discussion with CEOs of commercial banks to promote the deployment of PAPs as one of the instruments to enable payments on the continent. So there is a very strong commitment from the private sector to contribute, not just for the purpose of commercially priced returns on investment, but also going back to the initial point on all of us Africans being committed to making that vision of May 1963 a reality. And so if you are CEO of a commercial bank, yes, you have your shareholders to be aware of their interests, but you also want to make a contribution to Africa's advancement. So we have a very, very encouraging level of interest from Africa's private sector, because all of us know we are not going to be saved by somebody in another part of the world. Yeah. It is us as Africans who have to make sure that we redouble our efforts to lift our continent out of the condition that it has been in since the colonialists left our shores.
Right. And on that philosophical note, it speaks to the theme of this year's 31st annual meetings, which is, to own your destiny, create economic prosperity, and also advance a platform called a global African. Mm-hmm. So we know that the world crudely is divided between the global north, the global south. We know we're moving in an era of multipolarity, where multilateralism now means that there are new centers of power. How can we leverage the collective power of Africans and African descendants in the diaspora?
There is not a single African country, in my humble opinion, that will ever be globally competitive on its own. Not South Africa, not Nigeria, not Kenya, not Morocco. Our markets are too small to be globally competitive. We have to continue on this path of leveraging on the combined population and the combined market size. The African market, in and of itself, can be, and I believe is on track, to be globally competitive in a range of different sectors. The production of vehicles. Between South Africa and Morocco, we produce, as a continent, 1.2 million units of vehicles per year. Yeah. The demand is that by the year 2035, we should be producing 5 million units of vehicles a year. We are 17% of the global population. So that tells you that there is a domestic market. By domestic, I mean AfCFTA market, for us to focus on to create that global competitiveness. Pharmaceuticals, a similar story. Yeah. 2019, we imported $16.5 billion worth of pharmaceuticals. And by the way, those are generic drugs. Yeah. Generic drugs that we import from a country that I shall not mention. These are areas that are within our reach, where we focus on creating a market that will be a single market based on rules that will enable the competitiveness, the global competitiveness that all of us want to see.
I'd like you to expand on this theme just very briefly, because obviously the one thing that Africa has is the youth dividend. So you've got a labor pool for the future. You've got fledgling markets that will evolve. And so you can create global value chains. Or use African factories to be part of global value chains. And so when we consider this idea of global Africa, and we consider the relationship that we can build with CARICOM, how do we extend that network of those value chains?
One of the lessons that must be instructive to us is, from COVID, is that the concentration of global supply chains in one region or the other, one or two regions of the world, is not in Africa's interest. Yeah. We have got to create supply chains that are at the service of Africa's industrial development imperatives. Of course, without disconnecting from the global economy. And we are beginning to see that. We are seeing that in the area that I've just mentioned of pharmaceuticals. We are seeing that in manufacturing, where we are moving towards the establishment of Africa as an alternative center for supply chains development. Of course, it's not going to happen overnight. Yeah. But we've got to, as the world shifts And as these competing geo-economic and geopolitical contexts emerge, where do we position ourselves as a continent, leveraging on this market size that we have? So on the one hand, the continent has many challenges, but Africa's challenges are Africa's opportunities.
Yeah. Okay. And a final question to you as we wrap up. So you've got another 5 years. What will your priorities be? Because you spend so much time on the legal aspects, on the blueprinting, the crafting. Now it's time for doing. And I'm encouraged by the fact that the first consignment under AfCFTA rules left our shores about 2 months ago. So it's actually happening. So what comes next?
The trading is happening. The first 4 years, as you correctly said, we had to construct the rules, which we have done. Now we are focusing on accelerating the implementation and the movement of the goods and the services. We started trading commercially meaningful trade in Ghana in October 2022. We started with 7 countries. This year in Rwanda, Kigali, there will be 38 African countries that will be trading a range of different products. Value-added production, by the way, a range of different products under the rules of the AfCFTA. So I often get asked the question, why is trading not happening? The answer I give is that trading is happening. It may not be the large volumes that we want to see. It may not be happening across a range of different products as much as we want to see, but it is happening, and we must always remember that the European Union started in 1947-48 as the European Coal and Steel Pact. It took them 72 years to be exactly where they are today. So we must expect that this will take time, it will take discipline, it will take political will, and we have all of those that are required for us to succeed.